wow. Okay, so, yeah, thank you very much. It's been it's my first time at DICE, so all the other talks this morning, it's sort of so inspiring, and just seeing how consistent that theme is of breaking down borders, in particular between us as developers, and ultimately between players and communities. I think, having heard the others, this talk's a little bit different. It's a little bit more nuts and bolts on design, and a little more specifically design focused around the Nemesis system, but hopefully that's still interesting. So, Shadow of Mordor was a third-person AAA next-gen console game that came out last year in 2014, and really exceeded all of our expectations for how well it went once it released. And so the big driving force of that was the way players, reviewers, community latched on to one of our main features, which was this thing, the Nemesis system. And what we did was, rather than sort of, I think there's been a lot of talks, discussions, GDC talks every year about gameplay versus story or gameplay versus narrative, was really trying to jump outside of that and actually saying, okay, how can you make narrative out of the gameplay? How can you actually put the player and the game together to be able to create their own stories? So that's really what we focused on. And so in the next 18 minutes and 16 seconds, I'm going to really quickly go through how we actually approached the design of the Nemesis system, what drove us to focus on that, what lessons we learned from that on the way, because I think something really important to remember is this was our first time developing a game within this genre for these consoles and so on. So obviously it was a massive learning experience for us, and these really were our very first steps towards what's actually possible with creating these player-driven stories. So what we learned, and also just looking back and what were some of our references and our sort of inspiration. So one thing that's sort of, I think, different about our game from maybe any of the other games that have been on stage here today is that it's still a single-player focused game, but we still take a lot of lessons, like community is still incredibly important, connection between players is still incredibly important. So how can we still take those same lessons and apply them within a single-player game? And again, none of these are saying this is the one right way to approach design. This is just what we did with Shadow of Mordor and how and why we feel that worked. And then finally, just some ideas that we could have in regard to the future of where we might take this in the future. So basically, just going to Monolith and our culture, our particular brand of black licorice, to quote one of the earlier talks. One of the things that we really believe in, not just from the point of view of game design, but also as our studio culture as well. So there's a psychological theory. It's a model that we use. You know, it's not like we're sort of evangelical cultists around it or anything, but as a model for how we approach our design, is that human beings have three fundamental needs. And the key idea here from a game design point of view is that a player's needs, when they're playing our game, what satisfies, motivates, engages a player, are not different things from what satisfy and motivate and engage people in daily life. And that sort of goes, that's people on the team, or that's our players, or indeed anyone, ourselves. And this is a very, very different model from perhaps what some of the older models we used to talk about a lot in relation to game design were of fun, which can be a very amorphous concept, or optimal flow, or challenge, and those sort of things, which can absolutely be really satisfying, but don't always explain what it is that keeps someone engaged with and coming back to a game for a long period of time. And so those three basic needs, according to self-determination theory, are competence. And that really breaks down usually into two big buckets. One is kind of the feeling that you're kicking ass. Two is humans have a very inbuilt desire to feel a sense of growth and accomplishment and learning. So how can we make our game simultaneously feed those two needs of our players? Secondly is autonomy. And autonomy sometimes gets confused with the idea of freedom, you know, just okay, I've got a big open world, I can do anything. But more importantly, autonomy is the fact that your decisions that you take have a meaningful impact on the world. So again, that's something we really wanted to double down on satisfying for our players with the game system. And the last one is relatedness. So human beings have a fundamental need to connect with each other. And often, you know, in games that can be satisfied in multiplayer or community, but we wanted to see if the AI, the NPCs in our game could satisfy that relatedness and create those sort of relationships with the player. And then also noticed a couple of the earlier talks today have mentioned there has really been a bit of a renaissance in pen and paper gaming and tabletop gaming and role-playing gaming. And this was something as well that was a big inspiration and reference for us. And if you sort of go and have a look, there's a lot of really interesting discussions around these topics of actually role-playing gaming and a breaking down of games into 3 different areas that are sometimes positioned as competing against each other. So Gamers is, you know, I don't actually care about the wrapper, I just care about the mechanics of the game. I just want to win, I just want to grow, I just want to express my own power. So classic power gamers. Narrativist players, people who just really care about the story, immersing themselves in the story, following the story, and not so worried about the power gaming side. Or simulationist. Is this real? Is it believable? Is it immersive? And again, I think it's a trait of a lot of the most successful games that actually what they do is not treat these as either-or possibilities, but actually find a way to bring them all together. And again, that was another big goal of the Nemesis system. And then finally, this was partly a design philosophy for us as a studio, and partly just a constraint. We'd never made a game on this scale before. Breaking into the AAA action-adventure space is a pretty challenging thing. And we knew we were never going to win just on the sheer quantity of content that we could produce. So we had to make a set of features and systems that when they interacted together, made interesting things emerge, made interesting stories emerge. So they were sort of the 3 underlying principles with which we approached the design and that led to us coming up with the Nemesis system. And then the other one that we really bet on in regard to player psychology and player motivation is players, well, just to step back a bit, we as game developers absolutely love telling stories. We love making narrative games. We love making our beautiful cinematics. We love telling stories. And just that realization that the players are no different than us. They also love creating and telling and sharing stories. It's just such a fundamental, innate human need. But it was more important for us to worry about empowering their ability to tell stories than it was for us to worry about telling them our wonderful stories. And then this was really, I guess, the secret sauce of how the Nemesis system worked, is we had to, so Gestalt is, and I think there's a lot in common between vision, imagination, and storytelling. We had to give people detailed anchors at sort of points in the story so their imaginations would fill in the gaps in a way that created these really rich narratives. And then also to maximize the number of different stories we could tell and support, we had to understand what was enough information to give the players so that their imaginations and their storytelling could then run off and fill in those gaps. And it's would have been very easy for us to fall on either side of that line, of either giving too much and then it's a crafted story and it doesn't work, or giving not enough and then it just feels like a random or a kind of sterile environment. So, bringing all of those things together, the goal of doing all of those things, of self-determination story, of giving players the tools to imagine their own stories, was then to create something that was emotionally engaging in a way that our own crafted missions couldn't have been. And just as an example of how that came together, I just wanted to show a quick video.
Olgoth.
Hey, Olgoth! I pissed that guy off. Well, come on, Olgoth! Oh, shit! He's gonna see where I go. Fuck! There he is! Olgoth, the humiliator! He's still alive! I'll kill you! Oh! You're not going anywhere! Finish me! Finish me! No!
Too easy. How does it feel being so stupid?
Shut up! Shut your mouth! Yes! No one can save you! You are mine, Olga! Everyone look! This is Olgoth! Now! No Goth!
So anyway, yeah. That was kind of the point of all of the human psychology and button pushing, was to give people an emotional experience where there's a few things. One, they could create their own stories, they could become emotionally engaged with those characters, and then maybe even more importantly, in the modern world where we've got YouTube and we've got all these other vehicles, they could share those stories with each other as well. And then just really quickly and at a high level, but just going into some of the nuts and bolts of the Nemesis system, one of our big references in designing this was sports. And I could say sports games, but really even sports in general. I obviously had to change this image to remove any reference to the Super Bowl last Sunday. But anyway, the sports are designed as systems which generate stories every year. You know, they start with the early playoffs. They're designed that if there's a failure through the mid-season, you don't rewind to the last save and start playing again from that point as much as you potentially wish you could. You embrace that and move forward. Commentary systems in sports games. There's the ability to remember and recall things that have happened previously. Obviously, they're narrative systems that build drama out of conflict and tribalism, and then their career modes. You can follow one rookie player all the way from just entering the league all the way up to superstardom. So all of those systems were things that we took and we said, okay, how can we take all of that dynamic narrative potential and put it into an action-adventure game? And then the difference in an action-adventure game is you, as the player, have a point-of-view protagonist that can even make those stories even more dramatic and engaging. And then another really important pillar for us was memory. So that's Metal Gear Solid, which blew people's minds years ago because when they put in the game, it remembered if you'd previously played Castlevania. So it acknowledged and spoke to something you'd done. And as soon as you put the player at the center of the experience and acknowledge them, it sort of just blows out their level of engagement with this world. So we wanted to make a system that could just do that again and again and again. So it's not a failure point if you've run away or if you've died or if you've killed your enemy, if you've killed his friend. All of those things are potential for new stories. Something else we wanted to do as well, and this is, I think, a thing of blurring the lines between what's single player, what's multiplayer, what's co-op, what's community. Kill cams in Call of Duty were absolutely brilliant because what they did, they took a moment of failure, of death, they showed you something you could learn from, and they encouraged you to get you straight back into the game. And again, that's what, failure, death is one of the main points at which people will drop and stop playing your game. So turning death into an opportunity, as we saw with the previous video, and engaging that so you want to go back and get revenge, and it's creating a new story and a new opportunity is something we wanted to do. And probably one of our biggest earlier influences was, in fact, a driving game called Burnout Revenge. So that satisfaction, the guy drove you off the road, again, you failed. It didn't do the standard video game thing of rewinding time, let time keep moving forward, let you hunt down track and wipe that guy off the road. And the satisfaction of doing that, again, is something that we took and migrated into an action-adventure game, and that worked really well. Players love that. As I say, the way that manifests is we get to go and read these stories. And the thing, without needing to read this or the many, many others, is all of these stories always have I, me at the center. It's the fact that the whole, the world creates these stories around the player, which are really engaging for them. Something else as well, we're obviously working in one of the world's most beloved IPs, which is Middle-earth. And also, we're creating a world in which your relations to the villains are the key pillar of the game. And so being able to create iconic supervillains was a key part of the system of development. So the scars, which we were able to put onto our enemies, were very, very effective because they did a number of things. One, they made the most powerful enemies as they grew look like supervillains, look iconic, look recognizable. Two, they did it in a way that spoke directly back to you as the player. So you burned me, you scarred me, you forced my best friend to stab me in the back. So they were really iconic visual representations of the player's actions and their own personal stories. And of course, you know, whether it's Batman or Lord of the Rings, they really helped us have this system for creating supervillains. And then the other thing, by being able to, you know, there's a lot of rules around stories. If you go into TV tropes, it's an incredible site. If you use those stories in a story you write, they're probably going to come across as cliches. If you systematize them and let players drive them, they'll understand them and embrace them, and they become their own stories. So by taking a lot of these big tropes of how villains work and building them into a story system, the Nemesis system, players love that. I did want to have time to show a wonderful Nicolas Cage montage, but maybe next time. And then the other thing that, again, this is a little bit like sports, but again, power structures and hierarchies are something humans are pretty well wired to understand. So turning that into the game system and basically turning Mordor into a giant prison yard was something that simultaneously worked very well for us from a game system and a story system point of view, but it also mapped wonderfully to the key themes of Lord of the Rings as being about power. And then finally, we thought about this a lot. It really is actually, you know, we're trying to make stories on the fly within the game itself, so it's very, very much like improvisation, except the guys who are doing the improvising are our NPCs, they are the enemies. But some of the key rules they need to follow from improvisation is anytime the player does something, never shut that off. Always build on it. Always create a story out of that. Always go yes and. So you killed me, that's a starting point for a story. You ran away, you killed my friend, you lit this fire, you've been sneaking around, you've been... Whatever it is the player's done, we can take that and try and build a story from it. And then the other thing that makes your story feel really intentional, again, this is just something I think that's hardwired into the human brain. If you remember something, an earlier event from the story, I saw you picking those pink flowers, and then call back to it later, people will always backtrack it as if it was intentional all along, and it can make something that was actually just a procedural story feel smarter. So then, of course, as I say, this was very, very much our very first steps into the possibilities of procedural storytelling in terms of creating NPCs that start to, in some ways, blur the lines between relating to other real human beings and relating to NPCs within games. And we think very, very much at the beginning of what, you know, the possibilities for those sort of ideas could be. There's so many places now where we're interacting with artificial intelligences and AIs. So my personal fantasy is still for Burnout Takedown combined with my Google car so it can revenge take down people. But, you know, Siri, if we could have avatars, IDs, like NPCs, really bringing those characters to life in a way that can support the player. Secondly, I don't even know if, I haven't double-checked this stat, but I just heard it the other day and I thought it was amazing. We're saying the most watched media today for boys 8 to 12 is YouTube videos of Minecraft. So whatever game you're making now, you have to be making something in which, you know, people can create and express and share their own stories. There's really only so many ways people can play and watch any sort of linear experience. So making sure that we build our games to be systems that support these incredible emergent stories that encourage players to share them as well. And of course, the better the game is for sharing, the more that's going to facilitate people sharing it with each other. And of course, PewDiePie was one of our sort of biggest channels for reaching people as well. Because of the chaos and emergence and dynamics of the Nemesis system, it made it ideal for YouTube as well. And then finally, as I said, it was very much our first go here, and we very much focused on a single-player experience and what we could do to kind of put the player at the center of that. But there's obviously enormous potential in the future for what we could do with collaborative storytelling and collaborative sort of characterization stories and the Nemesis system about that, which, of course, going back to the self-determination theories and goes back to the sort of dawn of time, human beings' urge to tell stories to each other. So that was a super fast run-through of how we approach the Nemesis system. If you're interested at all in some of the other kind of reference points or things we looked at as inspirations, there's a list there. If I was going to say anything as a recommendation, it's that there have been some amazing innovations in storytelling and narrative stories in pen and paper RPGs recently. So games like Fiasco and Fate are a huge amount of fun and great inspiration. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to the talk, and enjoy the rest of DICE. And if you have any other questions or want to talk more about the Nemesis system later, I'll be around. Thank you.